Hump Day edition of Birds 365. You got the Mac guys, John McMullen and Jody Mack hanging with you. We're lucky enough to have a very good Eagle guest joining us now, part of the three-writer grouping that put together a kind of telltale article on the Philadelphia Eagles, paranoia, mismanagement, and office politics. The title gets you right there. You can't get to the article fast enough when you see that. Bo Wulf joins us here on Birds 365. How you doing today, Bo?
Doing well. Credit to the editor for the headline.
Editor credit to you guys because it was a hell of an article. Before we started to get into the exact things that you guys were able to unearth, after you write a piece like this, and both John and I have been singing you guys' praises for a couple of days now, you get responses. The way the Athletic has it set up, people can comment right there online afterwards. You've got your social media accounts and the like. How much attention do you pay to that? Do you want to know what everybody thinks? Do you wait a good couple of days and then say, all right, now I got to go through this all? Or do you not even pay any attention to it at all? It was a very attention-grabbing article that you did. How do you deal with people's opinions about it after the fact?
That's a good question. I think you sort of like pay attention to the immediate reaction as the story goes up. You want to see, if it's reaching people or not, and then as the critical mass gets a little bit higher, you sort of tune out a little bit. But it seems like the overwhelming reaction from Eagles fans was something like, good job. I hate you for making me so depressed.
So you should have gave out a link to some kind of therapy site or something of that nature, Bo.
Yeah, we should have had some kind of a deal for that or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. Should have been sponsored, but
sponsorship. Yeah.
I do think one of the things we had Sheila on yesterday. So, after looking at it and sort of ruminating through 24 hours, I want to go a different route with you. When you started sort of this story, when you guys began it, and you're around the team obviously every day, the pandemic obviously scaled back our ability to reach people last year, but nonetheless, you know what's going on with this team. So when you started this to when you published it, what was the biggest surprise to you that came out of it?
Well, I think it's important to say that we started this process, without an endpoint in mind. The idea was we would all reach out to, people we knew or had some kind of connection with, and we would just ask them, how is it that this team went from the top of the league to, one of the worst situations in the league? How did this, Super Bowl roster and franchise sort of crumble over the course of 3 years? And I think we were probably expecting a little bit more, Carson Wentz stuff. But that's not really the direction that it went. And listen, we talked to, not just people who are no longer with the team anymore or people who left because they were told to leave. We had a good cross section of sources across sort of levels and departments, and everybody was sort of talking about, the political nature of this building, and not just from people who have, only worked in that building. People who have worked in other places say, this is a different sort of atmosphere behind the scenes than other places we have been.
Well, let me, again, I want to get into actually what was written and where we go from here with this, but I do want to ask you one more question about the fallout. Again, I thought it was on point and very revealing. It was surely not complimentary for the Philadelphia Eagles. Do you get any feedback from the organization itself, either directly or through channels that, hey, you rubbed some people the wrong way, maybe some important people the wrong way, that wasn't right, they disagree? Sometimes it'll lend itself to another column thereafter if there's a strong enough disagreement and you can get a sit down with somebody. What kind of feedback did you get, if any, from the organization itself?
Well, listen, I mean, we tried to be as fair as possible as we went through this process. So the lines of communication with the team were open before and after the story was put out. We wanted to present information as fairly as possible. And I think, as we were like going over the article on Sunday, we're going word by word and trying to be like overboard, that we're not, taking any cheap shots, or everything that's in there has been vetted by multiple independent sources other than quotes, obviously. So yeah, I mean, listen, I'm sure that the Eagles don't love the tone of or I guess the overall way that the front office is described, but there should have been no surprises from their end.
Well, okay, let's get into the guts of the story itself. I mean, one of the things that concerned me the most of how the Eagles are portrayed is the lack of transparency from certain parts of the organization. For instance, I don't think a lot of Eagles fans even know who Alec Halaby is, and he is very important to this organization, an executive vice president. When you think about, and even if you go to Howie Roseman and Jeffrey Lurie, who are public-facing figures, they don't talk that much. But the head coach is out there multiple times a week, and it seems like the head coach is often thrown out there without a lot of information. I think that would be fair to say. If the analytics and the scouting department are butting heads, shouldn't one have the same kind of transparency as the other if you want them to be some sort of equals?
Yeah, and I think the problem is not necessarily that we don't hear from Alec Halaby, that there's not as much transparency to the outside. I think the real problem is there's not a lot of transparency within the building, and that's how you get a situation where people on the scouting side or people on the coaching side sort of view the analytics department with a a suspicious eye, because there is not a lot of transparency about how decisions are made, and the result of that is natural finger pointing. Like if we take a guy on draft day who is not at the very top of our board, what other choice do I have than to sort of point fingers and say, oh well, it must be the analytics influence, or from the other side it must be Jeffrey Lurie's influence or something like that. So I think that is the problem, and that was a very common theme of the people we talk to, even people who are speak highly of Howie Roseman or happy there. It's I wish that we could have a little bit more understanding of how these decisions are made, and that's that's the kind of thing that's like, it's not just football, it's like any business that you're in. If you don't know how decisions are made or how your work is impacting the overall product, of course that's going to lead to frustration.
One part of the story that I thought garnered the most attention, and well, it should, was about the Tuesday meetings between Howie Roseman and Doug Peterson and Jeffrey Lurie, and that they oftentimes turned into inquisitions, not just corrective criticism for the head coach. If they were as bad as your sources told you that they were, and they affected Doug, and it seems to me, reading somewhat between you guys' lines, that is the case, that it was something that just made Doug Peterson crazy. How good a job did he do keeping it to himself, not letting it leak out into the public? He did do some of his inner circle, and you guys were able to get to those type guys, but it sounds to me like he was under scrutiny like nobody's business, certainly not a Super Bowl winning coach's business. I think in 2020 hindsight, he did a pretty good job of keeping it under wraps. He never publicly showed that. Do you think that was eating him up inside?
I think so, and you're right that he did. He did not let this sort of seep out into his public persona. But it's hard. It's hard not to sort of feel for Doug in that, like, you win a Super Bowl, you prove everybody wrong. Going into that season, you're getting doubted by all sides and probably internally as well. And you feel like, okay, like I've done it. I've earned a little bit more respect. I've earned a little bit more say. And that doesn't happen to be the case. Even in 2018, it's back to the Tuesday meetings. It's maybe a little bit more heavy-handed on recommendations about what he should do in game on fourth down and 2-point conversions and stuff like that. So you get to 2019, you have this win in Green Bay where the team's 1-2. You need a win. You go into Lambeau. You beat Aaron Rodgers, and offensively, like, you run the ball a lot, and because it made sense, you're in 12 personnel. The Packers defense is going in nickel and dime, so of course you're going to run the ball. And then you come in on Tuesday, you're feeling good, and you get questioned about why we didn't pass the ball. And I don't want to say that like Jeffrey Lurie is coming in and pointing fingers and is like disappointed that you're not right, you didn't pass the ball more, and he's upset about it. But even if he's asking very innocently, like why didn't we pass the ball more? Explain the the offensive game plan to me. We wouldn't have heard about this if it was the kind of thing where Doug took it that way. Obviously, Doug took it some sort of way that, word of the meeting spread. And I think a lot of this stuff sort of comes down to, and Sheil might have said this, just sort of like personal dynamics. Like if there's somebody to go to Doug after that meeting and be like, listen, don't worry. We're just like, this is part of the process. Nobody's second guessing your decisions. We just want to sort of better understand it. If you're Doug Peterson, like over the course of 5 years, and especially the 3 years after winning the Super Bowl, you have to imagine that stuff sort of did wear on him, especially on sort of a week-to-week basis.
One of the things I was always interested about with Doug, Bo, is after winning the Super Bowl, typically the next move for a head coach would be to seize power, to try to get as much power as possible. Doug never did that. In hindsight, I think that was his biggest mistake. I think if you sort of do that with all that money in the bank, so to speak, after the Super Bowl 52 win and say, look, I have to have the ability to hire my own coaches. Tuesday meetings, look, if I don't have time, I got to get ready for the game. Maybe we'll cut them down to twice a month or once a month or whatever. Do you get that sense that he didn't seize the power when he had the opportunity?
Yeah, I mean, that's a fair point. And it certainly doesn't seem like that's his personality. Like, to be fair, like I don't think that Doug necessarily wanted to be super involved in, the process of the draft or picking the roster. I think he wanted to focus more on coaching. But you're right. I mean, in some ways, this is sort of a tale as old as time, right? Like the disease of more after winning the Super Bowl, everybody sort of wants a little bit more power. And maybe Doug didn't seize as much power as he could have. I think it's fair to say that probably Howie Roseman and Jeffrey Lurie maybe overestimated their impact on that 2017 roster and thought that meant that they had, discovered some secret sauce, as opposed to recognizing the fact that they just hit lightning in a bottle and didn't necessarily discover anything that the rest of the league wasn't keen on. Lucky is good and celebrate what you did, but that doesn't mean you should overvalue what you've done and look to have even more influence than you did before. So, I mean, those dynamics are, classic, but I think you're probably right. If Doug is looking back on it, I'm sure he probably does wish that he had pushed for a little bit more influence in the wake of the Super Bowl.
Bo, I got another relationship question for you. Howie Roseman showed Carson Wentz the love, at least to me, in the most important place, which is the bottom line in your paycheck, giving him a $128 million contract. We've got certain things that became known that Howie had the fathead in his office of Carson Wentz. I think it's rather obvious that the organization, aka the general manager, was infatuated with his quarterback. And in about I'd say under a year, 10-month period, that relationship went completely to smithereens. How did it go so bad so fast? If there's blame to be shared, how would you share it between the two parties? Was it more one guy's fault than the other guy's fault? This seemed to be a love affair that was hot and heavy, and all of a sudden they're heading off to divorce court in pretty quick order. What the hell happened between Howie Roseman and Carson Wentz?
Yeah, that's an answer that we weren't really able to get to the bottom of. Why is it that Carson Wentz, even if his relationship with Doug Peterson had soured, why is it that when Peterson's gone, he still wants out? And what happened with his relationship with Howie Roseman? And I don't know if it's as simple as he didn't trust Howie as a team builder to get the roster, back in better position, or if he didn't trust him to, get the pieces that he needed. I'm sure that Carson Wentz, like all of us, was looking at the roster over the past couple of years thinking, get me a receiver. But I mean, listen, Carson Wentz deserves plenty of blame here. I mean, if Carson Wentz was just bad last year instead of awful, we wouldn't even be having these conversations. Doug Peterson would probably still be here. The whole gang would be back together if they had just gone 7-9 or something last season. So Carson Wentz deserves a lot of blame. And certainly Howie Roseman, like as was described to us by some people, has and he admits this, sort of a weakness for his favorite players. And maybe Carson Wentz had outsized sway on some decisions, whether that's on the roster or with the coaching staff. But He doesn't want to be sort of the bad guy, Billy Bean from Moneyball. He wants to be connected to the roster and feel like he has a pulse of what's going on in the locker room. But there's no doubt that, if Carson Wentz welcomed Howie Roseman as the guy who was going to lead the rest of his career and be in control of that, he would still be here.
It's interesting you bring up Moneyball, Bo. I think I asked Howie about Zach Ertz, and he went into that long dissertation about Moneyball, but being the bad cop versus the good cop. I do want to move forward with you, though, because we have a new head coach, and I want to talk about what is the upside for Nick Sirianni here. I mean, it's unlikely he's going to win a Super Bowl after year 2. It's unlikely he's going to get out of those Tuesday meetings. He doesn't have the cachet to do that. So does it all come down to either personality? He's willing to accept that. Maybe like Jalen Hurts versus Carson Wentz about competition. Jalen seems to embrace it. Carson didn't exactly embrace it. Is his ability to accept things his only path to success in Philadelphia?
Yeah, it's funny because Doug Peterson was described by so many people to us as like the easiest guy they've ever had to work with across departments. Like, somebody said like he might not have been the brightest bulb, but he was like a pleasure to work with always. And it's hard to imagine that if Howie Roseman couldn't make it work with him, that over time things aren't going to, sort of, dwindle down in terms of his relationship with Nick Sirianni. This will be his fourth head coach, obviously, and each of those previous 3 relationships have soured at some point. But in terms of Sirianni, it's so interesting to think about the dichotomy of the final 2 candidates for the job. Like Josh McDaniels isn't coming in here, sitting down for those Tuesday meetings, accepting that he has no role over the roster, letting Howie Roseman control the 46-man roster. If you bring in Josh McDaniels, you're bringing in a guy who wants to have sort of a Belichickian hand in everything in the organization. And obviously, it's fair to surmise that would have clashed with Howie Roseman at some point. This was Jeffrey Lurie's decision. It wasn't Howie Roseman's decision. So they bring in Sirianni. And what was so interesting in even the call that Jeffrey Lurie made to Sirianni, it was, we're excited for the coach you are and the coach you can become. I think they view him as sort of an investment in they can bring him along as a head coach and hold his hand a little bit. And there's no doubt, like I'm sure there's going to be those Tuesday meetings with Sirianni. I'm sure that Sirianni is going to have to accept that he doesn't have the most powerful voice in the organization, which I mean, listen, it could work. It's fine. It worked with Doug Peterson. They won a Super Bowl. This stuff is not necessarily disqualifying, but you better win early, I guess, in those first 2 years, because this year there's no expectation the Eagles are going to be a great competitive team. We'll see what happens next year. There's excitement about Sirianni in the building, but it does seem a little bit like these relationships with Howie Roseman tend to have sort of a shelf life over time.
Bo, see if you're on the same page with me with this. Draft coming up now in only 15 days. And it'll probably be an easier collaborative because, as we're noting, new head coach, wet behind the ears, not going to come in, bang any tables on draft night. You got to get me this kid. I think his certainly opinion will be solicited, but I don't know that it gravitates right to the top and will drive Howie Roseman in his selections. Howie's got to listen to the analytics guys and his coach, his scouting staff. But at the end of the day, it's going to be Howie's pick. But I don't think he'll be as pressured, and maybe he had been hearing different voices on a draft night as he had been over the last couple of years. But this is a huge draft for Howie Roseman because the coach who won the Super Bowl got fired during the offseason. He did not. He needs to deliver on this one. More pressure or less pressure on Howie Roseman, all things considered, coming into this draft than usual?
What I sort of think less pressure because he's won that battle with Doug, and now the way that things have set up, everything is really pointing towards next year's draft, right? You've got the early pick coming for Carson Wentz, could be a first, it could be a second. You've traded down from 6 to 12, and you're getting a future first. So it really seems like everything about the organization right now is about building towards next offseason when you're going to have more cap space. You might have 3 first-round draft picks. Jalen Hurts gets this 1 year to prove that he could be the quarterback of the future, but it's a 1 year audition. There's no doubt about that, because they're going into next offseason, I'm sure, thinking if it's not going to be Jalen next year with our picks, with our cap room, that's when we're going to be able to try to really address the long-term, state of the quarterback position. So I feel like by the moves they've made, Howie has sort of bought himself an extra year, where next offseason is really the one where he's going to have a lot of pressure.
Bo, you touched on Jalen Hurts there, and I agree with you. It's obviously a 1 year, essentially, opportunity for him to seize the mantle of being the face of this team on the field. However, as you also pointed out, all the assets are moved forward to 2022, essentially. We know the wide receiver group hasn't had a 600-yard receiver in 2 years, which is amazing, by the way,
wow,
in the modern era of football. But nonetheless, how can he prove it with an inability? I mean, how do you even go about saying I'm the guy when potentially next season, who knows? Deshaun Watson might be available, Russell Wilson, even Aaron Rodgers, and you're in the mix for a top 10 pick if you're either bad, or even if you aren't, because you might have 3 first-round picks to go up. How can he even seize the job? Is it possible?
Yeah, I mean, I think the odds are probably stacked against him. You're right about that. But listen, I mean, you've got a new head coach who's offensively focused. He's bringing in a new offense. The offensive line is going to be much healthier next year, theoretically, than it was last year. Maybe Jalen Reagor gets to take a step forward in year 2 in this offense that could potentially be better suited for him. I think there's room for upside for Jalen Hurts. And listen, we know that even from last year, he's a guy who players gravitate towards. He's got sort of some kind of dynamic magnetism to him in terms of relating to guys. So I think there's a chance. I think it's in front of him. But you're right. The odds are stacked against him. And he doesn't have to just be good enough. He has to be good enough for the Eagles to not use those assets to look for somebody who could really be a franchise quarterback.
Let me follow up on that one. It'd be real simple, and we've learned through you guys how analytically driven the Eagles are. If Jalen Hurts throws 35 touchdowns and only 11 interceptions and has a quarterback ranking of 110, oh, yeah, he's going to be the quarterback in 2022. If he goes out and puts up Carson Wentz 2020 numbers, yes, his days are numbered, and he's out as the quarterback of the Eagles. It lands somewhere in the middle, maybe like the numbers that he put up in the 4 games that he started this year. Here's my question. Who's making that call? Is it the coaching staff? Is it Howie Roseman? Is it Jeff Lurie? Who's deciding, yes, this guy did enough. I want to go, and even if it's just 1 more year, we got to give him another year. Or, all right, we gave him his year, and it wasn't good enough in my eyes. We need to address this. We need to use assets to get our franchise quarterback. Who's the driving force behind that decision?
Well, listen, I mean, we can debate Jeffrey Lurie's influence on certain moves, but there's no doubt that the quarterback of the team ultimately is Jeffrey Lurie's decision. I think, what we've heard is that, Jeffrey is a little bit behind giving Jalen Hurts this 1-year audition to begin with, and he was certainly involved in drafting Hurts in the first place. But in terms of deciding who the quarterback is, who's the face of the franchise, like the most important decision that you make, even if Jeffrey is going to certainly consider the coaching staff's opinion and Howie Roseman's opinion, ultimately, the most important decision in the organization is going to come down to the most important person in the organization.
All right, Bo, final one from me, and I want to encourage everybody to subscribe to The Athletic. Bo did a tremendous job with Sheil Kapati and also Zach Berman. This story alone is worth it. I believe you guys are having a sale for the draft, so that will help people as well. And also, by the way, when are we getting a new Birds with Friends podcast?
Hopefully tonight, I think.
All right,
so
hopefully tonight. So we'll look forward to that. You, Bo Wulf, if you had the opportunity, what advice would you get? Used to be in that building. What advice would you give Mr. Lurie? I hate saying that, but what advice?
The Mr. Lurie thing is tough.
Yeah,
I would say it to me, it comes down to this transparency issue. And I think the feeling that people have that they are a little bit too siloed, that they don't have enough understanding of how decisions are made. I think that's a problem. And I think that over time that wears on people. And I think you have to sort of break down those walls a little bit. And you know, when it comes to things like the divide between, you know, coaching and analytics, it doesn't have to be that way. You know, you can explain to the coaching staff that we are here to help you. We are not here to tell you what to do. We want to help you better understand things, to help you do your job better. And when it comes to the decision-making process of the draft, like, you know, the best places that do it are they do all the work the months leading up. They set their board. They've had all of these conversations ahead of time so that they don't have to be making these conversations on the clock. And that is not the case with how things have been run with the Eagles. You know, take that J.J. Arcega-Whiteside decision over Paris Campbell that, you know, Jeff McLean has written about as well. Like, they're deciding on the clock who to pick. It's two guys at the same position. You should have already made that decision before the draft even started with how your board is stacked. So I think when you get into a situation where you're scrambling a little bit and people are unsure of how decisions are made, I think that is sort of a recipe for disaster.
Well, I could make my last question an easy one and just say, who are the Eagles taking at 12? But that's too simple, and I'd rather go in a different direction.
I think it's going to be Devontae Smith.
Okay, hey, if that's the case,
Jody will love that.
Hell of a talent at number 12. He should be a top 5 pick in my estimation. No, more fun is, you know, there's going to be someone who will be selected at number 6 or later, who will fall between 6 and 12, and the Eagles will not end up with this player, and Eagle Nation will be incensed that because the Eagles went from 6 down to 12, they had the chance to draft player X, and player X ends up somewhere else. Who's that guy? Because there's probably 5 or 6 or 7 candidates, but which one will garner the most ire from Eagle fans? I can't believe we didn't get this player because we decided to trade down and get an extra future number 1.
Well, and listen, that was the risk the Eagles took by making that move so early without knowing exactly how the first 4 or 5 picks were going to play out. And it looks like there's a chance we're going to get quarterbacks 1, 2, 3, 4, which, you know, if you sit at 6, you're guaranteed to have one of the 2 best non-quarterbacks there. To me, just like listening to Eagles fans, it sounds like Kyle Pitts is going to be that guy. Now, I don't necessarily think that I would have taken Pitts at 6 just because the bar for a tight end being taken 6 is so high for it to be worth it. He's got to be like one of the 2 or 3 best tight ends in the league by next year. And rookie tight ends take a long time to become as good as they're going to be in the NFL. But he's the guy who has sort of fascinated Eagles fans, I think, because he is this unique player, described as a unicorn in his position. He's from Philly, so he's got that extra little twist. So to me, he's the guy who is going to be the source of fascination for Eagles fans.
Bo, great stuff. We appreciate you coming on. We already talked to Sheil. Please tell Zach. We said to him as well. Outstanding job by all you guys. You've given us a ton to talk about. Not all happy, not all smiles, but Eagle fans are intrigued by everything you guys wrote. Thanks for jumping in with us here today.
Thanks, guys.
Bo Wulf from The Athletic here with us on Birds 365. John McMullen and Jody McDonald hanging with you. We'll come back. We'll continue the Eagle conversation, but there is some NFL stuff we need to put in the mix as well. Off-season workouts to not happen in Philadelphia and or potentially anywhere else. Johnny Mac and I will discuss next here on Birds 365.
If you missed any of today's show on the JAKIB Media channel, listen to the podcast on your way home. Available on YouTube, Apple, and Spotify.